And then I decided to draw it, and I plastered it on the ceiling of my van, so that when I would wake up in the morning, I could just stare at it and try to figure it out. And so I'm in the van in the morning, and I look at it, and then, you know, fairly rapidly I realize that there's a tetrahedron on the bottom of it. Okay? This part here is a tetrahedron, if it's seen in 3D. And then I looked up here, and I realized that in 3D, those lines would generate as well a octahedron. See, the thing is that most people don't see this thing as a 3D object. So flatten, it makes not much sense. But in 3D, it describes very specific geometry. So because I had this type of 3D mind, and I was always very intended on not doing the flat thing, I was trying to visualize this in 3D. But I couldn't figure out this middle box thing. I just couldn't figure it out. For weeks, months. Just like, you know, laying in my bed looking at this thing. And studying and all this. And then one day, I said, wait a minute. I realized that one of those boxes in the middle here, okay, matches the box in the top portion of the octahedron. So I thought, what if I slid the middle part box in the upper box and see what it generates? So I split them in two, and then I slid the bottom part into the top part. And when I did so, it was like a key, right? It just locked in and generated all the vectors necessary to have a tetrahedron and an octahedron, one on top of each other. So now I had all these vertices for 3D geometry. These are the only geometry necessary to produce a 64 tetrahedron grid. So I knew I was close. So I started to, I got really excited, and I continued studying and intensely studying, and I realized something, is that the Kabbalistic text doesn't say there's one tree at the root of foundation, the foundation of the universe, or at the root of the universe. There is 4 trees at the root of the universe. And they said that the 4 trees were attached at the same root. Now I thought, well, wait a minute. Maybe they're still giving us only half the code. Maybe there's 8 trees, and they're only giving us the polarity, the half polarity of the code. I looked at my structure again that I had come up with from sliding the bottom into the top, and I realized I had extra lines. And these extra lines match the lines to generate the star tetrahedron. So if I got all the branches of the tree, and then I attach the 8 trees together, I would have 8 star tetrahedrons coming together to generate the 64 tetrahedron grid. And what told me had decoded this right was that by the time I was finished, I could now plaster the Kabbalistic tree right over top of the 64 tetrahedron grid and get all the 9s of the 2D tree out of the 3D geometry. It worked. And hooked all together, it generated all the intersection necessary to build a 64 tetrahedron grid. And when I calculated this, then I saw that it could be done in many different ways. But one thing that was for sure, the Kabbalistic text said actually there's 10 spheres. They're called sephiroths. And they come from the word sapphire. Okay? So actually it's talking about crystals again. And it says that these sephiroths are the joints between the pathways of creation. And it said that there was this 10 sephiroth to one tree, but because they're all hooked to the same center, to the same root, which is called the crown sephiroth, which is described as a point of indwelling where God falls or God goes towards infinity. Okay? Basically describing a singularity. When they say that, they say that one doesn't count. So you get 9 sephiroth per tree. Well, if you have 8 trees, and you've got 9 sephiroth per trees, 8 by 9 is 72, and now you're right back to the 72 powers of God, and the code has brought you all the way back to the beginning in a feedback loop of coding information. And so I continue to find the solution to this. We did a small animation on how the trees come together, and it's literally the trees compressing together, creating that collapse into singularity, generating the code. It's quite amazing. Then it generates all the joints necessary to produce the 64 tetrahedron grid. So I wrote a little thing on this. It's an old book I wrote. It was all my findings on ancient civilization. I didn't write anything on. I wrote some physics in there, but just layman physics because I wasn't prepared yet for that. And the day I was writing this part of this little booklet that some people here have, that day, while writing this, I decided to log on to the net and look at what is happening in the crop circle world, and sure enough, that crop circle occurred that day. That was freaky. So it really, was an amazing journey through this information of the Bible and the codes of ancient civilization all around. And I really was taken by it. And it was so confirming, and it just took, and every step of the way, it just kept on confirming. And, in this short presentation, yeah, I don't have time to go through all the details. I do give week-long presentations where, we have time to go through all the details of things. And even then, in a week, I usually still run out of time. But there's so many of this amazing confirmation that came along the path. Every step, every time I would doubt, something else would come out and grab me and show me the way. And and it brought me to a very different view of not only our past, but our possibility in the future, and how we move from here to the next level, how this change that so many of us are feeling on the planet is going to occur, and how we can help it, and how we can help ourselves through it. To this day, I'm finding stuff. I mean, it's amazing. There's so much stuff out there that relates to this. It's almost like there's nothing else. And in case of this being correct, then there isn't really anything else. There is this amazing structure of the vacuum that generates reality as we see it, that generates our existence, and it basically oozes out of us throughout our civilization, throughout our understanding, throughout our physics, throughout our advanced thinking, and it really brings us to a different way of relating the world. In this way of relating into the world, and that's where I believe that the New Testament and the Old Testament comes together. Because I believe that the Old Testament is talking about very advanced technology, and that the New Testament is talking about where you have to be in being able to have this level of technology. And that when the two come together, then you have a complete being, you have a complete master, you have a civilization that has reached levels of masteries in which they have an equilibrium between their external world and their internal world. They have understood that they hold singularity, that they are in contact with the universe within their existence, even within their physical existence, which is made from subatomic mini black holes connecting all things together. And from that perspective, a civilization would build a completely new set of technology, a completely new set of interaction in its civilization, of relationship with each other, and certainly realize their common goal and their common aspiration. I always say this, you know, this model tells us really that the surface of a planet is like an event horizon from which each individual is a little sun ray, right? And that sun ray has a very specific vector direction in space in which it gathers a very specific set of information. However, all of our feet are pointing to the same singularity, to the same center, and connecting us all. And that singularity holds us on the surface of this planet as our gravitational field. And if we get to this, I believe we can develop technology out of this that will bring us to the stars. And I think, and you know, that's my understanding at this point, that this is the crucial time to be able to transcend our way of doing things to the way that we need to be able to do things in order to survive the changes that are coming into our solar system and move to the next level of interaction, and maybe even connect with other civilizations that have been in our galaxy, that have been observing us, that have been waiting for us to graduate and enter a larger community, a larger galactic community, and move on from here. So, thank you very much for all your attention today. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Those lines would generate as well a noctahedron. See, the thing is that most people don't see this thing as a 3D object. So flatten, it makes not much sense. But in 3D, it describes very specific geometry. So because I had this type of 3D mind, and I was always very intended on not doing the flat thing, I was trying to visualize this in 3D. But I couldn't figure out this middle box thing. I just couldn't figure it out. For weeks, months. Just like, you know, laying in my bed looking at this thing. And studying and all this. And then one day, I said, wait a minute, I realized that one of those boxes in the middle here, okay, and then I decided to draw it, and I plastered it on the ceiling of my van, so that when I would wake up in the morning, I could just stare at it and try to figure it out. And so I'm in the van in the morning, and I look at it, and then, you know, fairly rapidly I realize that there's a tetrahedron on the bottom of it. Okay? This part here is a tetrahedron, if it's seen in 3D. And then I looked up here, and I realized that in 3D,